Sexual and reproductive rights, which I've worked on forever, are not exclusively owned by feminists or by biological women. And conversely, women's bodily rights are not only about sexuality and reproduction. Bodies are also hungry bodies, homeless bodies, racialized bodies, militarized bodies. And it is the connections amongst all those things that are the challenge for us in the next period.
And the way we look at sexuality is, it's not only on sexual and reproductive health and rights. We say sexuality is at the core of politics. It's about political power, it's about economic power, it's about social inequalities. So I think that's something which gives us a lot of strength. The trend at the moment in Muslim countries in all is not the use of religion, it's the use of morality. Almost exactly the same as the Bush neoconservatism. It's almost like they've copy-pasted. But what is happening, for example, in Turkey now, the past 5 years, every single LGBT organization is faced by closure. There's a court case opened against them under the term of morality because these organizations are against a threat to public morality.
For me, the issue of women's sexual and reproductive health and rights is very personal and yet deeply political. To put it in a more political context, Africa's stark reality is that 1 in 16 women are likely to die in pregnancy or childbirth, while 1 in 2,800 women face the same risk in a developed country. Yet the continent accounts for almost half of the world's death from abortions. I think this is a very critical situation because it does speak about inequality at a structural level. Using the human rights framework has won progressive legislation on abortion in some countries across our continent. The impact in South Africa has been a 91% decrease in unsafe abortions, which shows that using this human rights framework can be very powerful.
Maybe I'm kind of lost on what's happening today. I don't understand. I'm at the Brazilian delegation. I was working for the CSW. I was working on the Declaration on Maternal Mortality. I'm ashamed. I'm ashamed. This is a declaration that does not mention unsafe abortion. How 15 years after Beijing? So is this, I think we have to understand what's happening. Backlashes, very important backlashes, due to a number of factors. Of course, there has been enormous progress, advance. It has been mentioned here. There is an energy floating, but also there is strong resistance, very organized, very connected, very articulated, with everything we praise for, coalitions, language, power, and I think it's also a moment to celebrate, but a moment to reflect.
When we're approached by religious organizations to work on the question of human trafficking, which we often are, this is a very big issue in our region, should we or should we not be part of this coalition? And the many feminists I know in the state are very divided on this issue because, of course, religious organizations are coming at it from a different perspective.
It depends on what is the agenda. If you are working on an agenda against poverty, you will probably be able to strategize and make a coalition with the church. But there are certain issues that are issues that fall into dogma of certain churches, and then there's nothing you can do.
Within the coalition itself, what we're saying is there are principles. We have very clear core principles and values. No matter who, religious or not, if they agree with the principles, then we work with them. That's how we have dealt with the issue.
So we are now launching a discussion on the continent in preparation for the next conference on the issue of culture and religion and sexuality. And I think it's a very critical discussion for our continent because of the way these institutions of culture and religion frame sexuality and how it impacts on the continued violation of rights. And it's a very difficult discussion to have, obviously, because it is of the conservatism, because of the backlash, because of the homophobia on the continent.
Some challenges that we've all identified that I think are still very much at the core of our struggle and our activism is this conservatism and how we challenge the global culture of patriarchy and how we challenge this moral code and how we continue to organize and come together and really reclaim our spaces.
War and disaster have generated a complicated and fractured terrain on which human rights and economic justice face unique challenges. Displaced people, devastated homes, scattered communities, and grieving families combine with acute health, resource, and food shortages. In the wake of the magnitude of such upheaval, what concerns me is that neoliberal policies and conservative political formations enter these spaces and adhere in the cracks generated by these catastrophes. In the context of this panel for economic justice, what structures of accountability can we generate when economies of the wealthy few are tied to the devastation of the disenfranchised many?
Something that Dawn and the Women's Working Group on Financing for Development and others have been working on, which is to really work with alliances to change the systems for global governance of the financial and the economic system. Related to this, the ILO sits in Geneva, and it's like they talk about decent work and the right to decent work somewhere from far across where nobody hears them, but they need to be absolutely central. What happens to employment, what happens to work, and how the right to work can get implemented at the international level is, I think, a huge challenge for us.
I think it's widely recognized, I mean, we would recognize in this room that, and even some strange allies that we might not have thought would recognize this, that we've ended up with a socially useless banking system, a socially dysfunctional banking system. And our challenge is to make it a socially useful banking system, to transform it from a banking system that leads to the violation of human rights to a banking system that will be supportive of human rights. And to change economic reasonings so that we develop economic reasoning that doesn't put all the emphasis on maximization of economic growth or maximizing the benefit-cost ratios, or focusing on extremely faulty concepts of efficiency, which turn out not to be efficient at all.
Questions now. Thank you.
Well, it's just a comment and inviting responses. The privatization of wars, a huge subcontracting business, the black waters at all. War is a byproduct of the scramble for economic resources, water, oil, minerals. The complicity of financial institutions in the arms and drug trades. So this geopolitical context, it seems to me, stifles human rights and creates a climate of necessity, of inevitability under the rubric of security. Makes it very difficult to mobilize human rights.
And there used to be old work on the militarization and the military economy from a feminist perspective, and I think that needs to be really sort of challenged, brought up to speed in order to address these questions, so that care is not seen as always only being on the negative side of the budget.
There's going to be an enormous cuts in the budgets for social care, for providing care for frail elderly. If we cut the budget for the nuclear weapons, we have no problem. So I think it's important to sort of emphasize that, because governments still often say there's no alternative, but there's definitely an alternative in countries where a lot is being spent on arms and armies.
Is there something happening in our movement where the issues around economics and the economic and social rights, it's not bringing in the kind of energy? Are we not engaging with the movement in the ways that really need to happen?